Observe the emergency medical technicians as they approach the modest brick residence on Maple Ridge Drive. The time is 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October. The lawn is neglected and overgrown. Mail is overflowing from the receptacle near the front door. The blinds are pulled shut, forming a barrier against the autumn daylight. Her name is Veronica Ashford. She is a 73-year-old woman, a retired music instructor, and a widow for the past 6 years. Her daughter initiated this welfare check following 3 consecutive days of unanswered phone calls. Veronica was known to always answer her phone. Always. Now, witness what transpires when paramedic Louis Brennan raps his knuckles on the front door. There is no answer. He knocks a second time, applying more pressure. The house remains silent. Within 20 minutes, the discovery inside this residence will initiate the most significant missing persons case in the history of the county. This was no ordinary welfare check. It was the beginning of an investigation into something far more malevolent. Veronica Ashford occupied the 2-bedroom home she had shared with her husband, Arthur, before his passing in 2019. She gave piano lessons from her residence 3 days a week. She was a regular at church every Sunday. She spoke to her daughter, Barbara Simmons, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at exactly 6 o'clock. But on Monday, October 14th, the telephone call went unanswered. Barbara did not feel immediate alarm. Her mother had been known to leave her phone in another part of the house or to doze off while reading. Yet when Wednesday's scheduled call was also met with silence, the first seeds of genuine worry began to take root for Barbara. By Friday, she was on the phone with the police. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at 2:45 on October 18th, emergency services tasked paramedics Louis Brennan and Karen Fletcher with a welfare check at 847 Maple Ridge Drive. They found a home that appeared entirely unremarkable from the street, with its tidy brick exterior and a small porch. The flower boxes that once showcased geraniums now contained only the desiccated remains of stems. Louis knocked. There was no response. He knocked again, with more force. Silence was the only reply. Police officer Trent Blackwell arrived to provide backup at 2:52 in the afternoon. This was standard operating procedure for welfare checks. He pressed the doorbell. Its chime echoed inside the still house. There was no movement, no reply. At 2:58 in the afternoon, Officer Blackwell made the executive decision to make entry. The front door was secured, but a side door into the kitchen yielded with surprising ease. It was far too easy. The lock showed clear signs of being forced. The kitchen was dark, all the shades drawn. The air inside was stale and held an unsettling odor. Louis and Karen entered the residence first, calling out Veronica's name. They were met with silence. The living room showed no signs of a struggle. A book was left open on a side table. It was a mystery novel, with a bookmark placed at page 147. A teacup, half full, was on the coffee table. The liquid in the cup had developed a film of mold. The television's remote control was resting on the arm of a chair, aimed at the dark, lifeless screen. Every piece of evidence pointed to a person who had simply gotten up in the middle of their day and ceased to exist. Officer Blackwell performed a sweep of the downstairs bathroom. It was empty. He then began moving toward the bedroom corridor. It was at that moment that Karen heard something. It was a sound, faint but clearly defined. It seemed to originate from inside the walls. She stood frozen. Louis was occupied searching the front bedroom, Veronica's sewing space. Officer Blackwell was on the second story, conducting a search of the upper floor. Karen was alone in the hallway, listening. The sound occurred again. It was a scraping noise, followed by a muffled thud. It came from behind the plaster of the wall near the basement entrance. She called out to Louis. He stepped out of the sewing room as she indicated the location on the wall. They both remained motionless, listening. Scrape, thud, scrape. It was not a random series of noises. It was deliberate, almost rhythmic. There was someone down there. The door to the basement was situated in the kitchen, just off the main hall. Officer Blackwell descended the stairs to join them. Louis opened the basement door and flicked the light switch. There was no illumination. The bulb was out, or the power line was severed. Louis unclipped his flashlight from his belt. Its powerful beam sliced through the absolute darkness. A set of wooden stairs descended into pure blackness. The scraping sound had stopped. Officer Blackwell led the way, his firearm now drawn. Louis and Karen were right behind him, their own flashlights scanning the subterranean space. The basement was an unfinished area. It had a concrete floor, exposed ceiling joists, a furnace in the corner, stacks of boxes against one wall, a laundry alcove with a washer and dryer, and a door. A thick wooden door was set into the foundation wall. It was secured with a padlock from the outside. The scraping noise began again. The sound was undeniably coming from behind that door. Officer Blackwell moved toward the door with caution. He called out, announcing that he was a police officer. The scraping halted, and then a voice answered, weak and hoarse, but it was unmistakably human. "Help me." It was Veronica Ashford. Officer Blackwell got on his radio to call for backup units and additional medical support. Lewis produced a pair of bolt cutters from his equipment bag. The padlock was a heavy gauge model, the kind used to secure something for good. It took 3 attempts to sever the lock's thick shackle. The door swung inward. The chamber behind it was small, roughly 6 feet by 8 feet. It had no windows. A single, bare bulb was suspended from the ceiling. It was currently unlit. The odor was overpowering. It was the smell of human excrement, of unwashed bodies. It was the scent of terror. Veronica Ashford was sitting on a thin, soiled mattress on the concrete floor. She was dehydrated, confused, and profoundly weak. But she was not dead, and she was not alone. In the far corner of the room, another woman was tethered to a support beam by her ankle. She appeared younger, perhaps in her late 20s. Her dark hair was matted with grime and sweat. Her eyes were wide, a haunting mix of terror and nascent hope. Her name was Janine Caldwell. According to official records, she had been missing for 6 weeks. Janine Caldwell had vanished on September 4th from a shopping center parking lot in Westbrook, 15 miles from this place. She had gone to a local Target to purchase school supplies for her daughter's kindergarten class. She never made it back home. Her husband, Roy Caldwell, reported her disappearance at 8 o'clock that evening. Her vehicle was discovered in the same Target parking lot the next morning. Her purse was found resting on the front seat. Her phone was on the passenger floor, its battery dead. There were no witnesses to the event. No surveillance footage captured the abduction. There were no leads. The investigation went cold within 2 weeks. Roy Caldwell gave television interviews. He posted flyers. He organized community search parties. He made public pleas for anyone with information to step forward. No one ever did. Janine Caldwell had simply disappeared from the face of the earth. Now, she had been found, chained in a basement that did not belong to her captor, but to Veronica Ashford. This space belonged to someone else entirely. It was a place someone had been using to commit terrible acts. As paramedics worked on Veronica and Janine, police officers began a systematic sweep of the basement. In a corner obscured by the furnace, they located a workbench. Upon that workbench was a disturbing collection of items: rope, duct tape, zip ties, a stun gun, and a laptop computer. The laptop was protected by a password, but the machine was active. Someone had been using it in the very recent past. Detective Hannah Cross arrived on the scene at 3:34 in the afternoon. She absorbed the scene in a single glance: the room itself, the 2 women being escorted up the basement stairs, and the array of materials on the workbench. She knew instantly what kind of scene she was walking into. This was a site used for abductions, and based on the tools and the organized nature of the setup, the person responsible had done this before. The lingering question was, who was he? Veronica Ashford was transported to Mercy General Hospital. She was suffering from severe dehydration and malnourishment. She had been locked inside that room for 5 days, with only minimal amounts of food and water. She informed investigators that a man had broken into her home on October 13th while she was reading in her living room. He had entered through the kitchen door sometime after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She heard the door open and got up to investigate the sound. He was already in the hallway before she had a chance to react. He wore a ski mask. He was tall, well over 6 feet. He spoke in a calm, almost polite manner. He promised he was not going to hurt her if she cooperated. He then forced her down into the basement and into that room. He locked the door from the outside. He told her that someone would find her eventually. He explained that he just needed time. He left the house that same evening. She could hear him moving around on the floor above her for hours, the sounds of drawers opening, furniture being moved, and someone typing on a computer. Then came an unnerving silence. For 5 days, she was left alone in the dark. The only sound came from the woman in the corner, chained and silent. Veronica did not know who this other woman was. They exchanged almost no words. The younger woman seemed terrified of making any noise at all. Janine Caldwell's physical condition was significantly worse. She had been held captive for 6 weeks. She was emaciated, traumatized, and was barely responsive to the paramedics. She was rushed to the intensive care unit with Lewis and Karen Fletcher accompanying the ambulance. Roy Caldwell received the phone call at 4:12 in the afternoon. His wife was alive. She had been located. He broke down completely on the phone. Unable to form words, he arrived at the hospital at 4:58 in the afternoon. Janine was conscious but under sedation. When she laid eyes on him, she began to weep. Roy held her hand and did not let go. The police needed to take her statement, but they allowed the family to have their time. Some things could never be rushed. Detective Hannah Cross refocused her attention on the basement. The laptop was sent directly to the digital forensics unit. The materials from the workbench were photographed and carefully cataloged as evidence. The room itself was meticulously processed for fingerprints, DNA, and any other form of trace evidence. The house was confirmed to belong to Veronica Ashford. She had lived at the residence for 32 years. She possessed no criminal record, no suspicious connections, and no logical reason to be involved in kidnapping. This pointed to a chilling reality. Someone else had access to this house, someone who was intimately familiar with its layout. It was someone who knew Veronica lived alone, someone who could come and go from the property without raising suspicion. Detective Cross began to review the possibilities. A family member, a neighbor, a maintenance worker, a piano student. Veronica had only one child, a daughter named Barbara Simmons. She was immediately ruled out as a person of interest. She had been at her job in another city when her mother went missing, a fact supported by phone records and multiple witnesses. The neighbors had reported nothing unusual. They saw no strange vehicles, no unfamiliar people. The house had seemed quiet for days. Detective Cross requested a list of every individual who had been inside Veronica's house within the last 6 months. Barbara provided what names she could. A plumber who had repaired a leak in July, a handyman who fixed the porch railing in August, and several of her mother's piano students. Cross decided to begin with the handyman. His name was Eugene Marsh. He was a man of 46, the owner of a modest home repair service, and a resident of the county for 8 years. His background was clean, showing no prior criminal history. At 6:15 in the evening, Detective Cross and Officer Blackwell reached his apartment complex. The residence was empty. Marsh was nowhere to be found. The building's landlord verified that days had passed since anyone had seen him. His work vehicle had vanished, and all calls to his phone were met with silence, leading directly to voicemail. Armed with a legally obtained warrant, Cross initiated a search of the apartment. Within, investigators discovered a file cabinet filled with business receipts and sensitive client data. Among the documents was Veronica Ashford's home address. It was accompanied by 4 other locations, each one the residence of an elderly woman living in solitude. Detective Cross cross-referenced the addresses within law enforcement databases. The system revealed that 3 of the women had previous police contact for a variety of incidents. These interactions ranged from welfare checks and calls about suspicious individuals to petty theft reports. One of the women had even filed a report about a break-in just 3 months prior. While no items were reported stolen in that incident, the door to her basement showed clear signs of forced entry. The 4th name on the list, Lorraine Garrett, corresponded with a missing persons case filed 4 weeks ago. She was 79 years of age and resided in Hillside, a town located 12 miles west of Maple Ridge. Her son had alerted authorities after she failed to appear for their customary Sunday brunch. Responding officers discovered her home was deserted. The scene offered no indication of a struggle or any hint of criminal activity. Her vehicle remained parked in the garage, and her purse sat untouched on the kitchen counter. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. Her case remained an active, unsolved investigation. Detective Cross made an urgent request for a forensics unit to process Lorraine Garrett's residence again, with a particular focus on the basement area. The team was on site at Lorraine's home by 8:43 p.m. They proceeded directly to the lower level. Tucked away behind a collection of storage containers, they found a hidden door. The entryway was cleverly obscured, a detail easily overlooked in the first sweep of the house. A padlock secured it from the exterior, which the team promptly severed. Inside, they found Lorraine Garrett. She had been held captive for 27 days and was only faintly conscious. Emergency medical personnel transported her immediately to the hospital. Her life was spared, but the path to her physical and mental recovery would be an arduous one, stretching over many months. The space she was held in was a chilling mirror image of the room discovered at Veronica Ashford's home. It was a small, dark enclosure without windows, furnished only with a thin mattress and a bucket in the corner. Upon a makeshift shelf lay a disturbing collection of materials: rope, duct tape, zip ties, and a stun gun. Investigators now understood that Eugene Marsh was using his victims' own homes as clandestine prisons. This dark pattern had been active for months, perhaps even years, escalating the urgency of the manhunt. His image was immediately disseminated to all law enforcement departments across the entire region. An alert was placed on his van's license plate within the automated reader network. Subpoenas were issued for his phone records, but it was clear that Marsh had taken precautions. For most of his communications, he relied on untraceable burner phones. All his transactions were conducted with cash, and he maintained virtually no digital footprint. Yet, he had made a critical error. The laptop computer recovered from the basement at Veronica Ashford's house held the key to his online activities. On October 19th, the forensics unit successfully bypassed the computer's password. What they uncovered inside was a trove of files, numbering in the dozens, containing photographs of women. They were all elderly women who lived by themselves, accompanied by detailed neighborhood maps and public property records. The files also contained utility service schedules and meticulously compiled lists of potential future victims. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of systematic planning. Eugene Marsh was targeting vulnerable women, whose sudden absence could easily be mistaken for a health crisis or age-related decline, and his methods had proven effective. The laptop's contents contained detailed notes concerning 7 different women. Among them were Veronica Ashford and Lorraine Garrett. The case of Janine Caldwell, however, represented a deviation in his pattern. She was a younger victim, abducted from a public place, and held in captivity for a more extended period. Investigators were able to identify 3 additional names from the digital files. All 3 were subjects of missing person reports filed within the last year, and none of their cases had been solved. The pressing question became, where was Eugene Marsh holding them? On October 20th, a breakthrough came when police got a hit on Marsh's van from automated license plate readers. The vehicle had been detected on 2 separate occasions in the vicinity of a storage complex in Oakage, a town 25 miles to the north. Detective Cross promptly secured a warrant for the entire facility. Records showed that Marsh had rented a pair of units, using a fraudulent name. The units in question were number 47 and number 52. At 11:23 in the morning, a SWAT team executed a simultaneous breach of both. Unit 47 was found to be empty. It held nothing more than provisions, including food, water, blankets, and cleaning supplies. It was clearly a staging point. But Unit 52 was not vacant. Contained within Unit 52, they discovered 3 women. All were alive, but just barely. They were identified as Dorothy Mills, age 71, Patricia Hogan, age 68, and Sandra Ye, age 74. Each of the 3 women had been officially reported as missing at different points over the preceding 8 months. All 3 had been imprisoned inside that storage unit, bound in chains and locked away from the world for weeks on end. They were immediately taken to the hospital. They were expected to live, but the psychological wounds they carried were immense. Eugene Marsh was not present at the storage location. It appeared he had deserted the location, probably after news of the discovery at Veronica Ashford's home reached him. The search for him pressed on. Then on October 21st, an employee at a gas station in Millbrook, some 40 miles to the east, made a positive identification of Marsh from media reports. Marsh had pulled in to refuel his van at 6:34 in the morning. The attendant immediately dialed 911, and police units descended on the area. Marsh had already fled by the time they got there, but in his haste, he had left behind a clue. He had used a credit card at the gas station, one that had been dormant for months. It was an uncharacteristic slip, an act of sheer desperation. That single transaction provided law enforcement with the direction of his flight. He was driving east, a possible flight path toward the state line. Then, at 2:17 p.m., a state trooper's eyes fell upon Marsh's van, traveling along Interstate 70. The officer signaled for him to pull over. Marsh chose to flee. For 14 minutes, the pursuit tore down the highway until a curved exit ramp became his undoing. He lost control, and the van collided violently with a concrete retaining wall. Authorities extracted him from the twisted metal, his injuries surprisingly minor. His freedom ended at 2:31 p.m. on October 21st, when Eugene Marsh was formally charged with 7 counts of kidnapping. This was followed by 7 counts of unlawful restraint. The list of accusations grew to include 4 counts of breaking and entering, with additional charges for assault and false imprisonment. Investigators determined Janine Caldwell was meant to be his long-term captive. The other women, the elderly ones, were something else entirely in the eyes of law enforcement. They were seen as experiments. They were low-risk targets, subjects that enabled him to perfect his dark craft. His actions showed a clear pattern of escalation. In custody, Marsh offered only silence. Through his court-appointed legal counsel, a plea was entered. He claimed he was not guilty by reason of insanity. The defense built a narrative of a shattered mind, arguing Marsh was afflicted with a severe dissociative disorder, leaving him with no recollection of the events. The prosecution presented a starkly different reality. The evidence discovered on his laptop, the painstaking planning, the selection of multiple locations, it all painted a portrait of a deliberate and methodical predator. For 3 weeks, the legal battle unfolded in the courtroom. Behind closed doors, the jury wrestled with the evidence for 2 full days. On March 8th, the verdict was delivered. Eugene Marsh was found guilty on every single charge. The judge handed down 7 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would never again be a free man. For Janine Caldwell, the journey to heal both body and spirit would take 3 months. She was finally reunited with her husband and daughter in January. Through therapy, she began the painstaking process of piecing her life back together. During the trial, she took the stand and confronted her captor, recounting the horrors of her imprisonment with raw and unflinching clarity. A profound silence fell over the courtroom when her testimony concluded. She would later reflect that speaking her truth was an act of reclaiming power. It was not justice. The past could never be erased, but this was a necessary step. For Veronica Ashford, the path to recovery proved to be a much longer road. Her physical wounds mended in a matter of weeks, but the invisible scars on her psyche remained. She ultimately sold the home on Maple Ridge Drive. The memories held within those walls were too much to bear. She relocated to a senior community, a place where her daughter Barbara could be a more constant presence. The music left her forever. She would never again teach the piano. The 3 other victims discovered in the storage facility, Dorothy Mills, Patricia Hogan, and Sandra Ye, also managed to survive their ordeal. However, their healing was complicated by prior health issues and the sheer length of time they had been held captive. Each of the 3 women would require ongoing, long-term care. Their families pursued civil action against Eugene Marsh, but he possessed no wealth from which to pay for the damage he had caused. The ripples of this case forced a systemic change in the way authorities investigated reports of missing elderly persons. Before this, it was common for such disappearances to be dismissed as cases of wandering caused by dementia, or as individuals simply choosing to move away without informing anyone. That was about to change. New protocols mandated thorough inspections of the entire home, including basements and any separate structures, whenever a welfare check was performed. The vetting process for home repair workers and contractors became far more stringent. In addition, community outreach programs were established to educate elderly citizens about recognizing and avoiding potential dangers. Barbara Simmons found a new purpose, becoming a powerful voice for these necessary reforms. She stood before the state legislature, recounting her mother's terrifying experience and exposing the systemic weaknesses that had allowed a predator like Eugene Marsh to hunt in the shadows for so long. In the year 2027, the state officially passed the Ashford-Garrett Act into law. It was a landmark piece of legislation that required stronger safeguards and new investigative procedures for the most vulnerable in the community. Paramedic Lewis Brennan received official commendation for his critical part in the discovery. He later shared with reporters that he had performed hundreds of such welfare checks throughout his career. The vast majority of them turned out to be nothing. They were often elderly individuals who had forgotten to phone a relative or had accidentally disconnected their telephone. But this call was different from all the others. The moment I heard that sound coming from inside the walls, he said, I knew something was deeply wrong. In this line of work, you learn to trust your gut feeling. On that particular day, our instincts were the reason people were saved. His partner, Karen Fletcher, concurred. It was she who had first detected the faint scraping noise. It was a sound that would echo in her memory forever. Officer Trent Blackwell, the man who made the call to enter the residence, would later label the case the most unsettling he had seen in his 15-year tenure. He was no stranger to the dark side of humanity, having witnessed domestic abuse, illegal drug operations, and things far worse. Yet, it was the chilling, calculated nature of Eugene Marsh's entire enterprise that truly disturbed his soul. For months following Marsh's capture, Detective Hannah Cross remained on the case, tirelessly searching for evidence of other potential victims. Her investigation uncovered 2 additional cases of missing elderly women in adjacent counties, both bearing the sinister hallmarks of Marsh's methodology. Officially, their disappearances were never solved. For their families, the agonizing wait for answers would continue. For a full year, the house on Maple Ridge Drive sat vacant before finding a new buyer. The new owners completely stripped the basement, dismantling and removing every trace of the hidden chamber. Their renovations were extensive, a deliberate effort to wipe away the physical stain of what had occurred within its walls. The neighborhood, however, could not forget. A police cruiser gliding slowly down the street would draw watchful eyes from every home. An unfamiliar van parked along the curb would prompt a concerned phone call to the authorities. The illusion of security was gone, and the long road to restoring it had only just begun. Only once did Janine Caldwell go back to the Target parking lot. It was a pilgrimage she had to make. Roy was behind the wheel that Saturday morning, 6 months after her ordeal ended. He pulled into the very same area where they had discovered her abandoned vehicle. For 10 minutes, she remained in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the store. Finally, she emerged. She passed through the sliding glass doors. She purchased a single pack of gum and then exited the building. It was an insignificant act, yet it was a moment she reclaimed for herself. On the return trip, Roy took her hand in his. The silence between them was profound. Certain triumphs require no announcement. Eugene Marsh is confined within a maximum security institution. He is permitted no outside contact. He has submitted numerous appeals. Every one of them has been rejected. He is destined to spend the remainder of his life behind bars. In case studies, forensic experts characterize him as a textbook organized predator, meticulous, deliberate, and devoid of compassion. To him, the women he targeted were not human beings. They were merely acquisitions, but they were human. They possessed identities, they had families, they had futures. Veronica Ashford, Lorraine Garrett, Janine Caldwell, Dorothy Mills, Patricia Hogan, Sandra Yeh. Their survival is the only fact that truly matters. The residence on Maple Ridge Drive is no longer marked by police tape. It has become a home once more. Its new inhabitants have filled the porch boxes with flowers. The laughter of children now echoes in the yard. The current of life flows onward. Yet, on the 18th of October every year, Barbara Simmons leaves a bouquet of flowers on the front steps. It is a quiet remembrance for the mother who endured, for the soul who was recovered, for the noise from within the walls that altered the course of everything. Some narratives never conclude. They simply resonate through time. Hey! When silence becomes a warning sign, every single day, somewhere in this country, an elderly person stops answering their phone, and most of the time, we tell ourselves it's nothing. They fell asleep. They forgot. They're fine. But sometimes, they are not fine. Veronica Ashford was 73 years old, a retired music teacher, a widow, a woman who called her daughter every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at exactly 6 o'clock without fail, for years, until she didn't. It took 3 missed calls before anyone acted, 3 days of silence before a welfare check was made, and inside that quiet house, behind a padlocked basement door, 2 women were waiting to be found. This is the reality we must confront. Our elderly loved ones are vulnerable in ways we rarely imagine, not just to falls or illness, but to predators who count on their isolation, their routine, their trust. Check on your elderly neighbors. Know their patterns. Trust the silence when it feels wrong. A phone call costs you nothing. A knock on the door takes 30 seconds. But for someone locked in the dark, waiting, scraping against a wall just to be heard, that knock is everything. Don't wait for 3 missed calls. 1 is enough.